Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2008 storyline in Amazing Spider-Man: Brand New Day from Marvel Comics. It all started with JMS. As some of you remember, in my review for The Other, I talked about how screenwriter Joseph Michael Straczynski, creator of Babylon 5 and writer of some of the best episodes of The Real Ghostbusters, revitalized Spider-Man with his run on ASM. He brought back a focus on the character's sense of humor and love of science, he revitalized the mythology of the character by adding new layers to it, he introduced popular and interesting new villains, and perhaps most importantly, he got Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson back together. But all of that more or less came to a crashing end with the superhero Civil War. In that series, apropos of basically nothing, Spidey decided to reveal his secret identity on national television. The superhero registration that was being debated only required super people to register their identities with the government, not necessarily make it known to the entire world. But I'm sure that having the one character largely defined by his nearly neurotic need to keep his identity secret so as to protect his loved ones, just throw that all away for a single story beat that comes literally out of nowhere, totally won't have any negative repercussions. Except of course it does. And in this case, that comes in the form of Aunt May being shot by a sniper that was gunning for Pete. After Pete realized the mistake he made of siding with Tony Stark in the Civil War and split. Knowing that the bullet was meant for him and not May, Pete is unable to live with himself for his mistake. And so he and MJ make a deal with Mephisto, basically the devil of the Marvel Universe, to sacrifice their love and their marriage in order to save Aunt May's life. And so Peter wakes up in a brand new day, in a world different from the one he knew the day before, where no one remembers his secret identity, and he's now single and living back with Aunt May in Queens, like he did when he was a teenager. To tell this story, Marvel brought in new editor Tom Brevoort, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name, who decided to end the multiple titles that Marvel had been selling for Spider-Man and instead release Amazing as a thrice monthly book, using rotating teams working closely together to ensure a feel of continuity. This is how Amazing Spider-Man would continue on for years, and technically Brand New Day would run from issue 546, arguably on through issue 700, where there would be a new reset to Spider-Man's world. Essentially, this wasn't just a story arc, it was the new standard for Spider-Man. But I'm only going to actually cover the titles that ran with the Brand New Day banner for this review, which was the first 19 issues, or approximately first 6 months, of the series. So with that said, let's see just how Peter's world was changed and take this away. The comic opens on cake! Yum! Wait, lemon cake? Ew. He wants cake that tastes like lemon. Aunt May does, apparently, because it's her birthday, and Peter, who is claiming to have taken a long break from being Spider-Man due to the whole superhero registration leading to lower crime, thinks he'll be able to actually make it to May's party without being called away to do spider things. So of course he's immediately called away to do spider things. A new super baddie named Overdrive is dangerously driving around the city, though I'm not really even sure how that's possible in New York, but I guess he manages it. This also introduces us to new character Jackpot. She's got them lucky sevens on her belt, so you know it's her. She's the local registered superhero from the 50 States initiative established following the Civil War, and obviously intended to convince the audience that she could be Mary Jane. Aside from, you know, the general look of her, the name is an obvious reference to her famous first line upon meeting Peter, "Face it, Tiger." And readers who were paying close attention and had read One More Day, the storyline preceding this one, knew that Mary Jane had made some secret extra deal with Mephisto when dissolving her marriage with Peter. So it probably seemed possible at the time that her deal had also led to her becoming a superhero. Spidey certainly makes the same logical conclusion, and in a later story even asks her if her real name is Mary Jane. Jackpot initially refuses to spill her secret, but eventually claims her real name is Sarah Irid. Erin, however you say that. When Spidey attempts to visit her in her civilian identity though, Sarah seems to have no clue who he is and acts pretty cagey when he tries to press her for details. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, Spidey stops Overdrive, who turns out to be Spidey's biggest fan, as you can tell by his doll collection that rivals my own. Man, I don't have an awesome chubby spider plushie though. Look at how spectacular that thing is. I need me one of those. Where was I? Spidey also fails to get to Aunt May's birthday on time, of course, and we move on more or less to the actual story. This first issue was an expanded version of a Free Comic Book Day issue that was meant to preview Brand New Day, and the actual issues of Amazing start with Peter Parker getting some action. Oh yeah. This specific shot is something writer Dan Slott, who will become kind of the major writer for Spider-Man over the next decade or so, is something he apparently was very excited about, as it will be used to open almost every single one of his issues, and even get a callback in one of the issues written by Bob Gale for some reason. And yes, that's Bob Gale as in co-writer of Back to the Future Bob Gale. And yes, they will make an intentional reference to that fact. Anyway, as the first actual issue of the series, it does a lot of setting up of where Peter Parker is in his life, in case you weren't following along before this. He's now living with Aunt May, he's single, he's jobless, and nobody will hire him for a job. Probably doesn't help that he apparently brought pictures he took with an automatic camera of himself as Spider-Man to a job interview for a photographer. Also, who invites someone to a job interview when they know they're going to turn them down already? We also see Peter's new group of friends, which surprisingly is focused around Harry freaking Osborn, who's, you know, dead. He died in the landmark issue of Spectacular Spider-Man number 200. Check out that sweet holographic cover. Woo! At the time, he was the Green Goblin, but the Goblin Serum eventually killed him. Only in the introduction of this new timeline of Brand New Day, Harry didn't die. He simply went overseas to Europe for a long time, and he's still Pete's best friend. Somehow. It will get explained eventually, but what's most confusing right now is the fact that Pete seems to be aware that Harry was the Goblin, but also isn't anymore. And Pete seems to have full trust that Harry is a good guy again. Harry is dating Lily Hollister, who Peter immediately falls in love with at first glance. In fact, pretty much her entire time on the page is spent with Peter just thinking about how gorgeous she is. It leads to this pretty gross moment where he, for no reason at all, starts freaking out about the fact that he finds her hot, and starts trying to force himself to think of her as ugly. Like, Thing level ugly. That's rude to both her and the Thing. Come on. Who wouldn't fall for those ever-loving blue eyes? Am I right? I'm gonna go out on a real crazy limb here and say that finding a woman attractive isn't a problem, Pete. Expecting her to owe you something because you find her attractive is the problem. Thinking just because you find her attractive that she's going to fall for you or something? That's gross. And just bad writing. They could have found other, less in-your-face ways of showing that Peter was into her. They certainly managed that kind of thing with the final member of the Friends group. If Lily is sort of a female equivalent to Harry, then her Peter Parker is Carly Cooper. She's even got a similarly alliterative name. Carly is a forensic scientist with the NYPD, and her other personality trait is that she's carrying a torch for Peter, even though he's too busy ogling Lily to really notice her. But Carly is also oblivious to the interest shown to her from Officer Vin Gonzalez, who absolutely has the hots for Carly, even though she's too busy ogling Peter to notice him. Vin and his partner on the force, O'Neill, are, I guess, the only two cops in all of New York, judging from how they seem to show up at every single crime scene we see. There's also the regulars at the Daily Bugle, though Peter doesn't seem to really be working there, at least not initially. In fact, the paper seems to be falling on hard times, facing potentially having to close down, and the shareholders are selling. Despite that, Peter, needing money, goes to collect some that Jonah supposedly owes him, and finally snaps from years of taking Jonah's gripes and yells back at the old man. This infuriates Jonah so much that he has a heart attack. And while he's in the hospital recovering, Jonah's wife sells her shares of the Daily Bugle to a guy named Dexter Bennett. and that gives him a controlling share over the Daily Bugle. Bennett then renames the paper the DB, but whether that's to shorten Daily Bugle or because it's Bennett's own initials is never really explored. What we do learn is that DB, Dexter Bennett that is a serious a-hole. When he first appears, he tips editor-in-chief Robbie Robertson and asks him to go and get some food like he's just some lowly servant. That's so disgustingly racist. But even worse, Bennett drinks Pepsi? Who drinks Pepsi? What a sick, sick man. Bennett also can't remember anybody's name at any point, which seems to be an intentional affectation, because we learn later that once he starts hating someone, he always remembers their name. But at least it gives us a nice Spider-Ham reference. Yeah, I see what you did there. Parker is the only one who seems to like the new management style, as Bennett pays significantly more than that old skinflint Jameson ever did. Whatever a skinflint is. But enough about the characters, let's talk plot. Spidey first finds himself dealing with a mugger running around wearing a Spider-Man mask, who even manages to mug Pete at one point and grabs one of his web shooters thinking it's a fancy watch. This is significant because it confirms for us that Pete is back to using web shooters, having gained organic webbing to better align with the Sam Raimi Spidey movies during the other storyline, as we saw in my video on that. This means that probably all those other spider powers he got during that comic are also probably gone. The mugger accidentally sticks a small-time mobster with a spider tracer from the stolen web shooter, and following that signal, Spider-Man accidentally runs across Mr. Negative, so named because he looks like a photo negative. He's also just very full of electrons. That's a bit of a science joke for ya. I'm funny. Negative is Overdrive's boss, and he's looking to take over crime in New York by using the formula on an ancient tablet Overdrive stole for him to create something called Devil's Breath. This is a gas that kills anyone in the bloodline of the person whose blood is used to create it. And so Mr. Negative creates some of the gas using that small-time mobster's blood, who just so happens to be the son from a marriage of two of the biggest crime families in New York, the Maggia and the Carnellis. Mr. Negative successfully wipes out most of the crime bosses, but Spider-Man manages to stop him from using it on some kids by offering up some of his own blood in exchange, so that Negative can unleash a spider bomb in case Spidey tries to keep meddling in his affairs. But while that's pretty much the last we'll see of Nagy for this series, the comic promises there will be much more of him to come, as he's shown to secretly be Martin Lee, the proprietor of the local homeless shelter Feast, where Peter's Aunt May works as a volunteer. Dun dun dun! But that's outside the scope of this story. So we move on to our next super menace, Menace. That's their name. Their name is Menace. Or at least it'll eventually be. Menace is another goblin-like baddie because we definitely don't have enough of those in the Spider-Man universe. What with like 4 different Green Goblins and like 8 different Hobgoblins and Jack-O-Lantern and Proto-Goblin, Grey Goblin and Demo-Goblin, and maybe some others I forgot. So why not throw yet another one into the mix? It's obviously a winning formula. Menace appears while the police are investigating Spider-Man for the Spider Tracer killings, where they found Spider Tracers inside a number of murdered people and believe Spidey to, if nothing else, at least be a person of interest. But Spidey ain't got time to be nobody's suspect, as Menace kidnaps a mayoral candidate, City Councilwoman Lisa Parfrey. Spidey leads the police on a chase that brings them along to help him deal with Menace, but interference from Jackpot, who is too new to the superhero game, and obviously inferior because, you know, she's a woman, leads to Parfrey being mowed down Norman Osborn style with Menace's Goblin Glider. Yikes. Her death left her opportunistic, grubby opponent, Randall Crown, to run unopposed. So Lily Hollister's father, Tough as Nails DA Bill Hollister, would announce his own candidacy. The DB endorses Crown because he wants tax breaks for the rich, so Pete is asked to take unflattering pictures of Hollister, leaving Pete for the first time feeling bad about his new boss. He doesn't feel that bad about it though because, you know, money. At this time, Spidey also finds himself dealing with Freak, a heroin addict who accidentally falls into the lab of Professor Kurt Connors and injects himself with unknown chemicals in the hopes of getting high. Because, you know, heroin addicts, they'll inject themselves with anything. I mean, earlier they did say that Freak was a bit of an exception, and they showed him willingly snorting sugar, because apparently he's willing to sniff, snort, inject, freebase, or whatever, absolutely any substance. Because that's how drug addicts are. Feels to me like a character created by old people who grew up on dare propaganda and are sitting here now going, drug addicts, those guys are the worst, am I right, fellow kids? Since this is the Marvel Universe, instead of dying from those unknown chemicals, like would make sense, Freak transforms into a freakish monster. Luckily, O'Neill, one of New York's 2 cops, is there for his first appearance and simply shoots him in the head. But it seems Freak can't die so easily, and he comes back with bulletproof skin and a hate-on for Spider-Man. But while attacking Spider-Man, he smells some drugs being cooked nearby and runs off to get high. And the resulting fight at that meth lab leads to Freak burning to death in a fire. But because this is obviously such a great villain, he's actually brought back a 3rd time, now immune to fire as well. Because it turns out that whenever he would die, he just mutates instead to protect himself from whatever killed him that time. By now, though, Connors has caught on to what's happening, and the good Doc and Spidey are able to work together to get Freak into a hibernation state in order to stop him and trap him indefinitely. But it looks like Oscorp, the corporation run by Spidey villain Norman Osborn, are the ones getting Freak's body. So luckily for us, that means we'll definitely be seeing this great villain once again. Yay! In between the 2nd and 3rd Freak appearance, we get a story that reveals to us that Spider-Man is still somehow an Avenger. Just secretly instead of overtly because, you know, the whole being an unregistered superhero thing. During this story, Spider-Man runs across warriors from an apocalyptic Mayan death cult who are trying to kill a scientist that has been studying them. Spidey rescues the scientist and then heads out into a blizzard to rescue some of the scientist's friends, who were trapped by the cult. Only the scientist turns out to be the real bad guy here, and he was trying to summon a Mayan death god to Earth and gain all of its power for himself. The other trapped scientist was intended to be his sacrifice to the death god, but Spider-Man, with some help from some local homeless people, is able to delay the scientist's sacrifice long enough to prevent the joining and stop the science guy's wicked plans. I'm always uncomfortable with stories entirely based around the concept that native peoples are just inherently magic. It just feels so racist to suggest that non-white people are so different that they must have some magical reason for being the way they are. But even if we ignore that, I feel like this story just feels kind of bland. We do get 2 things out of it though. One is a great reference to the Clone Saga where Spidey mentions how stupid his costume looks with a blue hoodie over it. I don't know, Spidey. I always kinda liked it. The other thing is that Peter gets offered a chance to move in with Vin Gonzalez, who was looking for a roommate. Vin was hoping that roommate would be Carly Cooper, but it seems he'd settle for a Peter Parker. And Peter's excited for the chance to not have to commute from Queens anymore, which is difficult, I guess? New York things, whatever. Next, Spidey meets up with Screwball, the first live-streaming supervillain, who is also a master of parkour, even making a nonsensical joke about having the parkour luck. A sort of fourth wall breaking joke of how Spidey always refers to his bad luck as the old Parker luck. Screwball is an obvious attempt to make a villain that appeals to what at the time would have been the youth of the millennial generation, and maybe some older Gen Zers. But she's also still so clearly written by old guys, like in this moment where they make a joke about how a bunch of youths are too busy watching the live stream to notice that the real action is happening right outside of their window. Kids, they do be looking at their phones too much, am I right, fellow kids? Despite her having no superpowers, and despite Spidey being what should basically be the original parkour master, our hero is completely unable to catch Screwball. Luckily, she flat out gives herself up when he plants a tracer on her, as she starts freaking out that this means he's marked her for murder. Which also makes her like the first person to ever notice that a tracer was placed on her, but I digress. At this point, Dexter Bennett pushes Peter into becoming a paparazzi, since his unique skill set allows him access to celebrities that nobody else could possibly get. Literally everybody in Peter's life tells him that he's really sunk to a new low here and he should not go this route, and his best pal Harry even disowns him, but he just kind of ignores them all because, you know, money. Bennett's payouts are enough for Peter to ignore his conscience, and so he follows a tip to seek out movie star Bobby Carr at his mansion in order to get a picture of the celebrity with his secret love, who is Mary Jane. She's dating Bobby Carr here. It doesn't prove to be that big of a deal, but we find out and Spidey doesn't, and so now you know, I guess. Bobby is also being stalked, though he doesn't know it, by a new villain who is paper thin. She starts murdering everyone who might tarnish Bobby's rep, even Bobby's own agent, and attempts to hunt down Mary Jane as well, thinking she stands in the way between her and Bobby Carr's true love. Luckily, Spidey is there when she attacks Bobby and MJ, and while MJ hides in a panic room to conveniently remain out of Peter's sight, Bobby helps Spidey stop the killer and help Peter realize just how badly he's hurting people with his paparazzi ways. The killer, by the way, is named Paper Doll, which I just want to mention. In my Spider-Gwen review, I talked about the band Married with Sea Monsters, who recorded their amazing take on the Mary Jane song Face It Tiger. Well, they also wrote a phenomenal song for Paper Doll. Seriously, it kicks ass. They also have a song for the Spider-Gwen version of Vulture, and Glory Grant's cat from that series, Murderface. And all four of those songs are freaking great. Anyway, there's really only one final story in the series, and it has to do with the Bar with No Name, a secret local pub where supervillains can go to unwind from a long day of supervillaining. There, a guy calling himself Bookie takes bets on just about any super activity going on in the city. This includes taking bets on Spider-Man actually showing up to confront some no-name villain calling him out on a live stream. And when Spider-Man actually does show up, Bookie makes some serious bank. Only then Spider-Man shows up again. Because it seems Bookie rigged the bet, expecting Spidey to not actually show, and since this was a live stream, well, there's only one person that could have possibly helped out Bookie with this. That's right, Screwball had dressed up as Spider-Man to set this all up. I find Screwball to be an incredibly annoying character, but I do like her purple hair. Purple hair is cool. Angry at Bookie for fixing the bet, old Spider-Man villains, the Enforcers, take Bookie out to Coney Island to torture him, forcing Spider-Man out there to save the poor man's life. It's not a particularly important story beyond giving us two things. One is the first hint that someone is deliberately framing Spidey for the Spider Tracer killings, which, like, kinda duh. The other is this absolutely amazeballs cover. I don't typically talk about issue covers, but I freaking love this one. Ah, bumper cars. Good times. That's where the Brand New Day collections end, although there was one more issue that ran with the title and is actually collected in the next volume for Kraven's First Hunt. That issue sees the return of Overdrive and Mr. Negative. It also sees Spidey running afoul of an off-duty Vin Gonzalez, who never liked or trusted Spider-Man anyway, and Dexter Bennett nearly getting killed on 3 separate occasions during the course of the story. And so it seems the DB is going to pick up right where the Daily Bugle left off on framing Spider-Man in the worst possible light. Not that it hadn't already done that once news of the spider killings broke. And here's a news flash. It's time for the breakdown. For anyone who has played the game Marvel's Spider-Man from Insomniac Games, probably a lot of what I've been talking about sounds super familiar, because that game based a lot of what it did off the setting and events of Brand New Day. And I think that's important to highlight because that game was fantastic, and it really shows that there's a lot of potential here. The attempt to get back to basics for Spider-Man as a struggling everyman whose life is constantly interrupted by a string of unique and creative bad guys isn't necessarily a bad idea. In a lot of ways, I think it worked, or at least would eventually pay off with some good stories that would come out over the years. But that said, these particular stories really aren't all that great. Most of this series was so clearly just set up for the new status quo, and because of that, not much happens here. Nothing is really resolved in any of these stories. We learn almost nothing about almost any of the new bad guys, and most of the plot threads don't really go anywhere yet. And while I get they wanted to set things up to pay them off in the future, one thing I definitely learned from all my covering of the New 52 is that can be a dangerous game if the artists doing the setup leave before the payoff ever occurs. We need something to be resolved in order to keep us interested in what might be coming. And there's just no effort to do that here, and it makes every story arc in these 3 collections feel rather like lame ducks at the best. So I'm giving this series a recommendation level of medium. I think this is an absolutely fantastic jumping on point for people who want to start reading more recent Spidey comics but don't want to start at the beginning. But these stories don't really stand on their own, and I don't think they're all that worth it if you're just reading various Spidey stories from here and there. The collected editions get 1 Planted Spider Tracer, 1 Jackpot logo, and 1 Spider plushie. I love him so much. He's so chubby. I mean, that's moving from bad to good, as usual, which will then break down like this. The first volume is 7 issues if you include Swing Shift, which is the expanded version of that free comic book day issue. It also includes an alternate cover gallery, editor Tom Brevoort's pitch for Brand New Day as a bonus, and a bonus comic story from 1995's Venom Super Special, which was the first comic Dan Slott ever wrote for Spider-Man. Volume 2 is also 7 issues, but only has a couple alternate covers as bonus material. Volume 3 is only 5 issues and has no bonus material whatsoever, on top of not collecting issue 564, the final issue to run with the Brand New Day banner, for absolutely no reason that I can figure out whatsoever. A serious letdown on that front. Flip that! Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Unfortunately, I fell behind on celebrating Spider-Man month this year, but I think I'm gonna try to do something a little crazy. I think I'm going to try to continue to cover the rest of the volumes of Amazing Spider-Man that follow this all the way up through issue 700 and the series then becoming Superior Spider-Man. I'll do this at the rate of about 1 volume or story arc per month, so it'll take quite some time to get there. This will be in addition to whatever else I cover each month, like covering Marvel Zombies in October and returning to Batman in November. Not sure how this is going to go over or if I'll be able to keep this up, but it's something I very much want to try to do. So if that sounds exciting to you, or if you did enjoy this video, or you're just a superhero of your own, registered or unregistered, then be sure to click all the YouTube buttons and subscribe to the channel so you can be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here, in the Comic Cave.